Good afternoon. Did you know that teenagers are leaving the church at an alarming rate? No longer are there days when generation after generations are sitting in the seats on Sunday mornings at churches around the world. Churches are getting older and older in their demographic. If youth leaders and youth pastors do not begin to pay attention and take responsibility for reaching youth students, then the next generation of young people will cease to exist in the church tomorrow. My name is Brian Howell, and I'm a youth pastor at a church in Spokane, Washington. I've been in ministry for approximately 11 years. For 8 of those years, I was a children's church director. For the previous 3.5, I have been a youth pastor. I've had the privilege of being around hundreds and hundreds of young people. I've watched God do amazing things in the hearts and lives of those young people through the ministries that I've had the honor to be involved with. It has been and continues to be the greatest job in the world. As a youth pastor, I'm tired of watching students leave churches on a yearly basis, whether it's after they graduate or before, because youth pastors are failing to do the job that God has required them to do. 85% of students fall away from the church after they graduate, and until youth pastors take this statistic personally, it will continue to devastate the church. Today I'm going to focus on 3 things that youth pastors and leaders can do to impact this generation for Christ. 3 things that will devastate that 85% statistic. 3 things that will reshape the way that you do youth ministry. The first is to be consistent. And the second is to focus on a gospel-centered youth group. And the third is to be relational. When I say be consistent, I'm referring to 2 areas within your ministry that you must be consistent in. The first is how you conduct youth ministry on a weekly basis. Josh Griffin has been the high school youth pastor at Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California for 15 years and says youth ministry is such a dynamic thing. Change is common and needed. The group dynamics can shift week to week based on who is there and who is not. The temptation can be that sometimes we can be dynamic with our approach week to week, changing style, flow, structure to a youth night. What I have noticed more and more is that a steadfast commitment to keeping a reliable and consistent structure can and will have more value and, dare I say, more fruit than a go-with-the-flow style. Students want consistency. In a world that doesn't offer much of that anymore, they want to know that when they show up to youth group on a Wednesday night or whatever night you have youth group on, they will know what to expect. My students know that when they show up to youth group, we will have a time of worship, we'll have a message or a teaching time, we will have time to hang out with each other, love, laugh, and maybe even play a game. What this consistency does in the heart and life of your youth student is it gives them a safe and secure place to be, to grow in their faith. And it also makes outreach a lot easier for them. Josh Griffin also says, in the past year we have adopted a much more standardized format to our youth services. They are not the same week in and week out, but we always incorporate a message of some kind, worship, and a small group time for all students. What I have noticed as a result of this change is that students don't ask, what is happening at youth this week? I want to bring a friend out. This was a question that, as a small group leader several years ago, I got often. Students now know what to expect, and as a result are inviting their non-church friends in droves. Consistency, in many ways, is safety, and creating a safe place for students to grow in their faith is of the utmost importance. I believe this statement to be true because I have seen it work in my youth group. I used to get numerous text messages asking, what are we doing this week? I don't get those anymore because students know what to expect. We consistently have between 3 and 5 new students invited every week. There is no guessing what youth group is going to look like. Students already know because of the consistency within our structure. Being consistent will also be a huge blessing to your leaders. They want to know what to expect as well. If your leaders have no idea what to expect as they show up for a youth group, then how will they know what to be praying about and prepared for? Will they really be sold out on the night and what is going on? What about those conversations in their small groups that they were having with students last week, the previous week, that they were unable to finish? Josh Griffin states, I remember vividly being a small group leader and having one of those God is moving huge nights with my small group guys, and just knowing that the next week we would take it further, challenging them even more, sharing more. But then we got to youth the next week, and now it's a crazy game night instead. The lack of consistency meant a loss of momentum, and in some respects, missed opportunities to build on what was already happening. Having consistency makes being one of your small group leaders so much better, because you know that you are going to have a time next week to answer those tough questions that you had to park. Or for students to share how they implemented what God put on their heart the week before. And I'm not saying not to have fun game nights, but have them scheduled in a way that they are not counterproductive to the purpose of your ministry. I also am not saying not to have a fun game night, movie night, or event night, but be consistent in whatever your structure ends up looking like. I said there were two parts to the consistency theory. The second one is being consistent with who you are. It's important not only for your students to know what to expect of your youth group, but also for them to know what to expect of you. As their youth pastor, students do not want to guess what kind of mood you're going to be in. They're constantly dealing with moody people at school or at home. The last thing that they need is to deal with an inconsistent youth pastor. They need to know that no matter what, when they show up at youth group, their youth pastor is going to love them and be excited to see them. I love the way that Mark Eads, the middle school youth pastor at New Covenant Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for the past 10 years puts it in his article, How Consistent Are You? Mark says, one of the reasons why I long to consistently be Mark Eads, whom Christ loves, in front of my students, was summed up in a very well speech by Chap at the conference. He said, our kids believe that everybody expects me to be somebody, but I have no idea who I am. Our kids are lost in understanding who they are. I believe if I can give them a consistent view of their youth pastor as one who is loved by Christ, they will slowly be able to believe that for themselves as well. I guess I grew up with so much inconsistency in my life that I want students to see me as a constant in their life. I want them to see the consistency that a relationship with Jesus Christ brings a person that is desperately in need of Him. If we can demonstrate consistency, then hopefully we will see consistency rise up on the inside of a young person, so they can believe in God and in the God that believes in them. The next step and second point is to have a gospel-centered youth group. What do I mean by a gospel-centered youth group? I mean just that the heartbeat of your ministry is centered around the gospel of Jesus Christ. Not games or gimmicks. Nothing wrong with games. Nothing wrong with exciting gimmicks. But if that is the body of your youth group, then the fire will eventually fade, and you will be left with a youth group that has very little to do and has no direction. I recently read an article that one of my youth leaders forwarded me. I loved it and agreed with it. The gentleman that wrote the article was Brian H. Cosby, an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church of America, and serves as an associate pastor of youth and families at Carriage Lane Presbyterian Church in Peachtree City, Georgia. This is what he said. It is amazing what youth will eat. I love sushi, but it's quite different than eating a live goldfish. I sat near the back of the crowd and watched with a curious seasickness, gazing at the teenager, wondering while keeping one eye on the nearest trash can. A loud, unified chant shook the entire room. Marcus, Marcus! And down it went. To the praise of his cheering youth, he was the envy of every guy and the disgust of every girl. The champion collected his prizes, and walked off the stage with a hero notched in his belt. So what can we do next week, I thought to myself. There was no way I can top eating a live goldfish. I was helping out with the youth program at the time, and we had been gradually escalating the shock factor to attract more youth. And for all intents and purposes, it seemed to be working. Every week we saw new youth who occasionally seemed to embody a little of the shock factor themselves. Over time, though, we began to run out of ideas and started getting desperate. The youth seemed bored, and we had to rethink of something fast. We didn't have much money in our youth budget, so we decided to be good stewards and spend the rest of it in bringing a Christian rock band to the church, though nobody had ever heard of the group. The band arrived, set up, and did a sound check from a stage in the church gym and topped the show with choreographed dancing. I was pumped. The youth are going to love this, I thought out loud. To my great horror and disbelief, only 8 youth students came. They stood lined up in a row with folded arms, listening to the thumping noise echoing around the vacant gym. I couldn't take it anymore. I was burned out on youth ministry, and I had just begun. There had to be something deeper, richer, and more satisfying than this. There had to be something that nourished the youth more than a wiggling goldfish and a high-priced band. He went on to say that we can do better. All too often, youth programs have turned to entertainment-driven models of ministry in order to bring in youth. Success has become the name of the church growth game. The devastating effects, however, are not only seen in the number of youth leaving the church after high school, but also in a spirituality and theological shallow worldview among many American teenagers. The irony is that these same teens actually want to grow and learn hard truths. They want to know how to think about suffering, how to pray, and why Jesus had to die. I'm totally convinced of this truth. I started out in youth ministry wanting to bring the fireworks, the events, the games, the videos. But what I found was that students really just want the truth. I would schedule events only to have less students show up for the events than they would show up for a regular youth group. So I realized something. Why am I killing myself to be gimmicky when all I need to do is give them Jesus? My time, my love, laughs, and be consistent in their lives. I do not think that my youth group is gimmicky, and I take great pride in the fact that I really believe that students are there because of the gospel centeredness it brings to their lives. Students want to know that God is in love with them, that He has a purpose and a plan for their lives, and that they are loved and that they matter. In that article, Brian H. Crosby wrote, he states what our task is as a youth pastor, and I agree 100% with this statement. He said this: when you realize that our task is simply to be faithful, you will have an overwhelming sense of freedom and joy. But this begs the question, what does it look like to be faithful to God in youth ministry? I maintain that how-to of being faithful in youth ministry, indeed in all ministry, is demonstrated through the means of God's transformative grace. Youth need the means of grace that God has provided His church, the local, intergenerational community of sinners and saints, to supply both the content and the theme of ministry. This is the biblical model given by Christ and witnessed in the early church and remains, I believe, the most faithful and Christ-centered approach to youth ministry today. What does your youth ministry look like? The final step. The final point to all this today is to be relational with your students. Theodore Roosevelt said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I believe this statement to be true and proven. You have to first capture the heart of a young person before you can speak into it. There was a great article on youthministry.com called Relational Youth Ministry 101. This article gives 3 great ideas on how to make and keep your youth ministry relational. The first one is know every student by name. I said this may sound easy enough, but as your group grows, it gets easier and easier for some students to slip through the cracks. It is easy to get lost in the crowd. The last thing that you want to happen in your ministry is for a student to come week after week and never be noticed. If this happens to a student, it could potentially be devastating to their entire outlook on God and church. It's important to make a connection with them and to remember their name. In Dale Carnegie's timeless book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he wrote, if you want to win friends, make it a point to remember them. If you remember my name, you pay me a subtle compliment. You indicate that I have made an impression on you. Remember my name, and you add to my feeling of importance. You want your youth students to feel important. Every time they step into the church or youth room, or you come in contact with them, it will reshape the world they live in to know that you believe in them and you know their name. Number 2, tracking your students. We are using a new software called youthtracker.net, and so far it is super powerful and useful. It tracks when students miss a weekend of your program, allows you to send and receive texts with students. Knowing when a student is there and isn't there is huge. When you contact a student because they were not there one week, their feeling of importance goes through the roof, and that is what being relational is all about. I've had a student actually say, I didn't come the last few weeks to see if anyone would even notice. As unhealthy as that may sound, it is a topic for another speech. It is a student's reality. And then number 3, Facebook, Facebook, Facebook. Our team is going to make it a point to really invest in the lives of our students, and that includes on Facebook. Our students are always on Facebook, and to miss out on connecting with students in this way is crazy. We use Facebook to chat with students, send them discipleship tools, invite them to events, and more. Clearly, it is much better to hang out with our students face-to-face, but in between Facebook can be a very powerful tool. I agree that Facebook is not the greatest way to hang out with students, but it is a very powerful tool. We have an Impact Youth page on Facebook, which is the name of our youth ministry. We use it to connect, post prayer requests, update students on events, and remind them of youth group that night. The bottom line here is that relationship is everything. If you don't have real relationship with your students, your youth ministry will never be all that it can be. Great relationships are what keeps students coming back. Not the games, events, or gimmicks. It's relationship. In conclusion, if you really want to make a difference in the hearts and lives of young people in the world today, and see that 85% statistic of youth walking away from the church decline, then I truly believe you will need to practice these 3 truths. Be consistent, be sure that your youth group is a gospel-centered youth group, and be relational with every student that comes into your life. And with those things, I believe we can change the next generation for Jesus Christ.